Okay. Thank you, Jane. It's great to be here this evening and great to have so many supporting. As I've put here, this was a lockdown project, and I didn't have the usual excuses of needing extensions to deadlines and having other things to do. I was really stuck inside having to get this done, and I had obviously family as well, with a youngster trying to learn online and a husband working from home. So it wasn't the easiest of projects to get done. Um, but at the same time, I think it was something that I was really interested in looking at, and very grateful to have had this time to do it. I'm currently at the University of Aberdeen, now doing a PhD looking at equity, diversity and inclusion in the mindfulness training place. So very much with the protected characteristics, and very grateful to the Mindful Association for actually funding this project. So hope to come back again, and James kindly agreed to put something together so we can share some of those findings. But in the meantime, this was the masters. It was in, well, my response to learning more about these countrywide difficulties in recruiting teachers, training and retention, and the levels of stress and early burnout were cited as reasons for this. And there was an article in The Guardian reported that between 2014 and 18, over the previous 4 years, 1.3 million working days had been taken off due to teachers' stress. And this was described as an epidemic of stress suffered by teachers. And we really wanted to do a project where I could get some newly qualified teachers or the students and their mentors together, and run some sort of mindfulness sessions. But because COVID came in, ended up being an extended literature review. So my apologies. We're going to be going through a lot of studies this evening, and I'll try to be as concise and quick as I can. And it was interesting because I hadn't realised that there was so much on the internet that was available. I'm very much like Graham, as a book person. I'm always with books around me and enjoy reading. So to actually have been stuck inside and without the usual sort of network and support of people that you have on an academic journey, I really, really missed that so much. But I did obviously have mindfulness groups that I connected with online, which was a great help. And this evening is a bit of a feel of that, being back online with such a lovely group here, and feel very supported with this journey. So these were the usual scholarly literature, the key terms, looking at occupational stress, resilience building, compassion, teacher training and burnout. I use snowball sampling. There's very little in education, and so I was able to look at the health sector, where there's been some work done with nurses and social workers, occupational therapists, and such like. And then the military and in international aid and development, which is where I started this journey of mindfulness back in 2015. And this is where I was looking at bringing in mindfulness into the development sector. And it took me to looking at post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic stress and secondary traumatic stress as well. And it was really very interesting, this research, and it was looking again at stress. And some of it is quite controversial, especially with the military. So I'll look at that a bit later. And this is what sort of led me in this direction. Again, I was working abroad, and I was actually in Liberia working on a project with young people and with mental health nurses. And Ebola struck in around 2013-14. So I found myself evacuated to Aberdeen, which sounds pretty traumatic, which it was. And then I sort of ended up doing a master's in mindfulness. So that's really the journey there. Anyone watching the Olympics or the Paralympics or the seen the stress that some of our athletes are under, professional sports, that stress, and Ness work on self-compassion as well. So systematic reviews, meta-analysis, the relationship between burnout and anxiety, and the diverse causes and effects of stress of teachers, and studies show that high stress is associated with different coping mechanisms and personality traits and responses, emotional responses, environmental factors, and burnout too. So I've done a little sort of diagram here just showing the different aspects. And Chang's study was actually over a decade of educational research that showed the high stress. And this is something that is global. It isn't just in the UK. It is global issues that are around education. So teacher burnout by Masek defined burnout as a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stresses on the job. And it has three dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency. These three went together. Occupational and teacher stress affects teachers in their early years of work. And I think this was the most surprising for me. It was thought to be as high as 46% in the first 5 years. And I think this is something that the World Health Organization look at work-related stress as the response people may have when presented with work demands and pressures that are not matched to their knowledge and abilities, which challenge their ability to cope. So the main findings in dealing with stress and burnout amongst teachers have shifted from the perspective of seeing teacher stress as a lack of personal coping strategies to the negative physical and mental responses, which could in the long term be detrimental to the physical and mental health of teachers, known as burnout. So there's also a relationship between burnout and depression and anxiety. And burnout can be regarded as a psychological condition that is the outcome of chronic work-related stress. And that includes emotional exhaustion, being cynical towards work, and suffering from chronic fatigue from excessive work demands. And absenteeism was also identified. And that was Melmed et al. So looking to what we can do, resilience, and that's sort of looking at resilience building, and Marston looks at resilience and says it's been broadly defined as a capacity of a dynamic system to adapt successfully to disturbances that threaten system function, viability, or development. And these critiques were largely resultant from extreme circumstances in which the term was associated with, such as natural disasters and other traumatic events. So in terms of teaching, this is not or education, it wasn't something that was very popular, and it was seen as something that people had to bounce back from. So in the context of education, if you haven't experienced teaching or the classroom, then how can you bounce back from the experience? So it's a learning curve, really. So also socioeconomic factors were contributing factors to this. And this is why it has been criticised and not really used. So instead, we have character building and fostering an attitude of grit. Some of you may have heard of that, and academic buoyancy as well. However, this was done at a time of COVID, where resilience was the buzzword, I felt, and certainly working on resilience at that time was quite useful for me. And from a Buddhist perspective, the resilience revolution, I listened to Larry Ward in 2020, defined resilience as the process of bouncing forwards. And I thought that was quite helpful. And by the time we come out of COVID, I think we were also traumatized. Anyway, so resilience was something that became quite useful in terms of trying to bounce back from something or bounce forward. So mindfulness techniques would be useful. Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence, which posits that emotions have a more central role for understanding the relationship between stress, burnout, and personality variables. And it's well known that mindfulness techniques can help with emotional regulation with teachers in particular and in the classroom. So as the other work, as I mentioned, with trainee therapists, I mean, Jane's very kindly going to put these up, and I will have a bibliography as well, or references to these, and we can have a look at those if you're interested in following up. This was work with social workers as well. Again, a very stressful environment where burnout and compassion fatigue or regarded as inhibited to ability to carry out work successfully. And participants reported positive changes in attitudes, behaviours, and energy levels following the intervention. So again, this was the issues around teaching in particular, where mindfulness training was seen to be effective at focusing attention, improving working memory and capacity, and increasing occupational self-compassioning and lowering levels of occupational stress and burnout. So these were, again, quite a few studies being done, which is interesting, I think. The use of supportive networks as well, I think, is a really interesting coping strategy. And, part of this was when I was, again, in lockdown, and I think a lot of us missed out on those supportive networks, especially young people too. And this is something that we're only beginning to see and understand now, I think. So criticisms, Purser writes that education shifting the inability to recruit and retain teachers is seen as a problem with training and support, rather than the larger issues like pupils' emotional behavioural issues, which could be due to stress caused by the educational system itself. Also for teachers, rather than better pay and working conditions. And again, mindfulness isn't for everybody, and some, they say the interventions, there's lack of evidence to prove it can help in the longer term. But I think as more research is coming through, we're more that we're learning at how it can support people in different ways. So at mindfulness, we're all very aware of mindfulness without an ethical compass or social critical framing. Mindfulness could just as easily be commodified and could become another psychological training program. Wigglesworth and Quinn, which was the biggest teaching study that looked at perceptions of mindfulness-based interventions in the educational workplace. And engagement with the practice was seen as a sign of seeking help, which was regarded as a weakness and being unable to cope in stressful environments. The association with religion or spiritual practices such as Buddhism it was regarded as a barrier to accessing practices. And then the connection to mental health, and it also had the reputation of being something hippie or new age. And again, mindfulness is not for everyone. That's why we need to have trained teachers and courses in mindfulness where people are vigilant and aware of what can happen. And it's the same looking at post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress and dealing with people with trauma, that the care has to be taken around them. So this was the post-traumatic stress disorder, to again going against the promoting peace, because it was with the military, and it's a core tenet of Buddhism. That's Purser again. And John Kabat-Zinn has stated that the community needs to reflect whether these adaptations are within the accordance with the Dharma, and if not, and then the community needs to really confront the ethical dilemmas that go with these studies. And I think as I say, that really important to know that with military, people afterwards had less post-traumatic stress, that they had mindfulness while they were also in combat or around the training of combat. So in conclusion, this presentation has touched upon the ethical, critical, and methodological issues. Mindfulness incorporated into health and well-being programs is regarded as a reactionary mechanism. So it could be introduced as a preventative tool to combat work and stress and early burnout. So, into research into a range of health differentials across all sections, work by Wilkinson and Pickard noted that the biology of chronic stress is a plausible pathway, which helps us to understand why unequal societies are almost always unhealthy societies. And I thought that was just an interesting quote. So with all this work that I've done and handed in 2021 and completed, it's still very much in my mind, wanting to do a project to reach out to student teachers and early career teachers. And I went back into schools when, we still had to wear masks and wipe down the desks, and hand sanitizers being passed around. And it struck me that a lot of the trainee teachers hadn't had a chance to actually teach. And that's one of the things in my own teacher training experience, that I was able to actually, have a trial in front of the classroom. It's not easy to stand in front of the 30 pupils. And if you've never done it before, they were really thrown into the deep end. Their classes were all online. And within schools, places like the staff rooms were empty because we were not allowed to congregate at that point. We were still sort of left in our departments and having to keep as far away as possible from each other as we could. And again, everyone that's learning needs to have that support of more experienced teachers. So this project was very much still in my mind, and I was awarded a Catalyst Seed Award by the Royal Society of Arts, who very kindly supported a pilot for those entering the teaching profession and their supervisors. And I've just finished up with the second cohort, which was face-to-face, which is very exciting for me. And I focused a lot on mindful movements and Qigong practices, and I opened it out to the wider community. It wasn't just for the student teachers. So that was skills in mindful innovative learning environments, SMILE. And that's an ongoing project, really, and it was really quite insightful. And again, a lot of what I've been through in the literature was really coming up in the work with the students that I was doing, which was really interesting. And I do hope to develop this in the future. Well, thank you very much for listening.